Hello. I only have one person here. It looks like it's Andrew. Hello. We'll wait just a minute before we get started. Put my phone on Do Not Disturb mode. Hope you're having a good Saturday. Today's going to be very chill. I'm even wearing a sweatshirt because it's chill Saturday. And then tomorrow will be Sunday Fun Day. Yay, we have another guest. So, I believe we are on chapter 2, which is called The Pool of Tears. So we will wait just a moment before we get started. Oh, 5 people. Wow. Everyone arrived at once. This is wonderful. All right. And I do have just a cup of tea today. It seemed like an English breakfast type of day. With a little sugar too. Hope everyone's enjoying their Saturday and not worrying about work. I know I'm not worrying about work. Today I've been playing with Legos. I built a pirate ship. And then I have been working on a puzzle with Raul. Tesla, what are you eating? Come here. Want to come up? Yeah, that's what I thought. Oh, ice cream for breakfast sounds really good. I just had Cheerios. And then I had leftover pizza for lunch. Yeah, Tesla, are you going to get those? Tesla's going to get all the views. It's all for her, huh? Should you just stay on my lap every live stream? Yeah. It's Tesla. So it looks like it's 1 o'clock. So let's go ahead and get started with Tesla. I can't see. Tesla, can you lay down? Can you rest? There we go. All right. Here. Okay, you gotta go down then. Goodbye. Chapter 2, The Pool of Tears. Curiouser and curiouser, cried Alice. She was so much surprised that for the moment she quite forgot how to speak good English. Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet. For when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now, dears. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can. But I must be kind to them, thought Alice. Or perhaps they won't walk the way I want to go. Let me see. I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. And she went on planning to herself how she would manage it. They must go by the carrier, she thought, and how funny it'll seem, sending presents to one's own feet, and how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, Esquire. Hearthrug, near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Okay, collar's coming off. Yeah, Tesla. I know. No more collar for her. All right. Just at this moment, her head struck against the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now more than 9 feet tall, and she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice! It was as much as she could do, lying down on one side, to look through into the garden with one eye. But to get through was more hopeless than ever. She sat down and began to cry. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, said Alice, a great girl like you. She might well say this, to go on crying in this way. Stop this moment, I tell you. But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears until there was a large pool all around her, about 4 inches deep and reaching half down the hall. After a time, she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she be savage if I've kept her waiting? Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask help of anyone. So, when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice. "If you please, sir." The rabbit started violently, dropping the white kid gloves and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time she went on talking. "Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. And yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different, but if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? Ah, that's the great puzzle." And she began thinking over all the children she knew that were of the same age as herself, to see if she could have been changed for any of them. "I'm sure I'm not Ada," she said, for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and oh, she knows such a very little. And she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is, oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at that rate. However, the multiplication table don't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome. And Rome, no, that's all wrong. I'm certain I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try and say, how doth the little? And she crossed her hands on her lap as if she were saying lessons, and began to repeat it. But her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come the same as they used to do. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. "I'm sure those are not the right words," said poor Alice, and her eyes filled with tears again as she went on. "I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that poky little house, and have next to no toys to play with, and oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use their putting their heads down and saying, 'Come up again, dear.' I shall only look up and say, 'Who am I then? Tell me that first, and then, if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else.' But, oh dear," cried Alice, with a sudden burst of tears, "I do wish they would put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being all alone here." As she said this, she looked down at her hands, and was surprised to see that she had put on one of the rabbit's little white kid gloves while she was talking. "How can I have done that?" she thought. "I must be growing small again." She got up and went to the table to measure herself by it, and found that, as nearly as she could guess, she was now about 2 feet high, and was going on shrinking rapidly. She soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she was holding, and she dropped it hastily, just in time to save herself from shrinking away altogether. "That was a narrow escape," said Alice, a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. "And now for the garden." And she ran with all speed back to the little door. But alas, the little door was shut again, and the little golden key was lying on the glass table as before. "And things are worse than ever," thought the poor child, "for I never was so small as this before, never, and I declare it's too bad that it is." As she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea. And in that case, I can go back by railway, she said to herself. Alice had been to the seaside once in her life and had come to the general conclusion that wherever you go to on the English coast, you find a number of bathing machines in the sea, some children digging in the sand with wooden spades, then a row of lodging houses, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon made out that she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice, as she swam about, trying to find her way out. I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, being drowned in my own tears. That will be a queer thing, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then, she heard something splashing about in the pool a little ways off, and she swam nearer to make out what it was. At first, she thought it must be a walrus or hippopotamus, but then she remembered how small she was now, and she soon made out that it was only a mouse that had slipped in like herself. Would it be of any use now, thought Alice, to speak to this mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here that I should think very likely it can talk. At any rate, there's no harm in trying. So she began. Oh, mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I am very tired of swimming about here. Oh, mouse! Alice thought this must be the right way of speaking to a mouse. She had never done such a thing before, but she remembered having seen in her brother's Latin grammar, a mouse, of a mouse, to a mouse, oh, mouse. The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively, and seemed to her to wink with one of its little eyes, but it said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse come over with William the Conqueror. For, with all her knowledge of history, Alice had no very clear notion of how long ago anything had happened. So she began again. Où est ma chat? Which was the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water and seemed to quiver all over with fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice, hastily, afraid that she had hurt the poor animal's feelings. I quite forgot you didn't like cats. Not like cats, cried the mouse in a shrill, passionate voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Well, perhaps not, said Alice in a soothing tone. Don't be angry about it. And yet I wish I could show you our cat, Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could only see her. She is such a dear, quiet thing, Alice went on, half to herself, as she swam lazily about in the pool. And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. And she is such a nice, soft thing to nurse. And she's such a capital one for catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice again, for this time the mouse was bristling all over, and she felt certain it must be really offended. We won't talk about her any more if you'd rather not. We indeed, cried the mouse, who was trembling down to the end of his tail. As if I would talk on such a subject. Our family always hated cats. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear the name again. I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject of conversation. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not answer, so Alice went on eagerly. There is such a nice little dog near our house. I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, you know, with, oh, such long curly brown hair, and it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner, and all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them, and it belongs to a farmer, you know, and he says it's so useful. It's worth 100 pounds. He says it kills all the rats and, oh dear, cried Alice in a sorrowful tone. I'm afraid I've offended it again. For the mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could go, and making quite a commotion in the pool as it went. So she called softly after it, Mouse dear, do come back again, and we won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned round and swam slowly back to her. Its face was quite pale, with passion, Alice thought, and it said in a low, trembling voice, "Let us get to the shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why it is I hate cats and dogs." It was high time to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with the birds and animals that had fallen into it. There were a duck and a dodo, a lory and an eaglet, and several other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole party swam to the shore. So that is chapter 2 of Alice in Wonderland. I know we usually start the book club discussion at 1:30, but I think we can really quickly go through the questions. And then if people sign in at 1:30, then they can just rewatch this whole thing on their own. So let's go ahead and look at the questions for chapter 2. Let's load them up. And I believe the first question I put was actually a grammar one because it's important grammar standard to know. In the beginning of the chapter, Alice says, things are curiouser and curiouser. So we had started to talk in English class about comparative adjectives. If you know what she should have said instead of curiouser, go ahead and write it in the chat. What was the correct grammatical way to say that? Instead of curiouser, what should it have been? And yes, Andrew, you are indeed in the book, aren't you? So if you know what it should have been grammatically, you can put it in the comments. I'll give you another minute to do so. Not curiouser, but man, all these notifications, go away. All right. So let's read the actual question. Yes. In the beginning of the chapter, it says, curiouser and curiouser, cried Alice. What error did she make? What are the correct positive, comparative, and superlative forms for the adjective curious? So this is chapter 2. This is chapter 2. I'm going to wait for chapter 3 till tomorrow. Okay. Last chance. All right, I put it in the chat. So curious has 3 syllables, curious. So that means that in order to put it in the comparative or superlative form, you have to say more or most. Now, a lot of people nowadays recognize curiouser as a word because of this book. So if you ever hear someone say curiouser, it's actually a reference to Alice in Wonderland, but it's still not grammatically correct because curious had 3 syllables. Question 2 says, what point of view is this story? First person, third person omniscient, third person objective, or third person limited? How do we know? So I'm going to really quickly review what those 3, what they mean. So first person would mean that the story is told from Alice's point of view. All of the action and everything is described with the pronouns I, me, my, we, our, us. So if that was part of the narration of the story, it would be first person because she, the narrator, is also a character in the story. However, that's not the case. For third person, normally we just talk about omniscient and limited. I'm adding one more to it, objective. So omniscient comes from omni meaning all and shant meaning knowing. So omniscient means all-knowing narrator. So that would be when the narrator is actually able to read the thoughts of all of the characters in the story, not just one of them. Objective means that the narrator is just telling the story as it would appear on the surface level, almost like they're a fly on the wall, and they cannot read the thoughts of any character at all. They are just observers with no opinions of their own and just showing what is visible to us or audible. Limited, by most definitions, means that you can hear the thoughts of just one character. So if you know what point of view Alice in Wonderland is, She put it in the chat. It's probably not going to be first person. So is it third person omniscient, limited, meaning one character's thoughts, or objective, meaning there's no thoughts. It's just flat out telling you. So go ahead and put that in the chat if you know. 10, 9, 7, 6, 5. All right, I'm going to put the answer. And Becca was right, third person limited. So we do not get to hear the thoughts of the rabbit or of the mouse. So in that case, this is third person limited. Now, that means the narrator has access to all of Alice's thoughts. So what was the author's purpose of having Alice talk to herself? Because if she was thinking it to herself, then we wouldn't need to hear her talking to herself every time she has something going on in her head. So think about why Lewis Carroll decided to include Alice talking to herself. And if you want to think about what we said yesterday about dream logic, that might be tied to it, or how we talked about she's not the sharpest tool in the shed. Think of all the reasons why the author might want to include Alice talking to herself. So the last question is super easy. Alice began speaking to the animals, including the white rabbit and a mouse, in this chapter. What do we call this literary illustration of animals and inanimate objects to make them seem like humans? So in our world, rabbits do not wear waistcoats and carry a pocket watch and say, I'm late. And mice do not swim away in a huff because we've talked to them about cats and dogs. What is the figurative language that is being used when Alice is seeing these animals almost like they're human? It's a figurative language type. Personification is correct, Becca. Yes. So even though personification can vary a lot, there's several, it's like a scale. Sometimes personification is as simple as my teacup smile to the morning. And it's just like, oh yeah, I can kind of picture it, the teacup symbolizing some happiness in the morning. And then sometimes personification is the candlestick sung and danced to Belle as he welcomed her to the castle. Personification can be very much just figurative. And then when we move into the world of children's literature and cartoons, you can take personification and start to make it literal. But personification is when you make an animal or an object act like a human. So for the question 2, the reason why Alice talked to herself, there's no right answer for that one. It's up to you and what you think you got out of Alice talking to herself. Every time she opens her mouth, it seems that she's mostly talking to herself. Even when she was talking to the mouse, she admitted that she was reflecting on Dinah, her cat, mostly for herself, not because the cat, because the mouse really wanted to hear about a cat. So I think with that, we've answered the 3 questions. I made them pretty easy for today. Tomorrow's book club, hopefully I can get the link out earlier. I apologize. I slept in because it's Saturday. But tomorrow, the 3 questions include 1 ace paragraph. Obviously, you don't actually have to do it, but it would be a great way to get some practice in. So tomorrow, expect that after we read chapter 3, I'm actually going to take my whiteboard and I'm going to make a mock ace paragraph 2 to get you guys some practice. So does anyone have any questions about the plan for tomorrow? Do you guys have any comments about chapter 2 that we've just read? Not a lot happened. I mean, it was just her growing, moping about it, shrinking, moping about it, almost drowning in water with a mouse, and then offending it by talking about a cat. There's really not a lot happens in that chapter. I warn you guys, the next one is a little weird too, but every chapter in this book is weird. So I think this was a nice, short and sweet Saturday book club meeting. I hope you guys like the art. Thumbs up if you like the thumbnails that I've made, not only for this video, but for all the videos on the channel so far. I hope to have fancy artwork for every video that we do from here on out. So give me a thumbs up for that, and you should definitely hit the bell button in case I forget to send the link out early in the future. So I will see you guys tomorrow for chapter 3, and have a great weekend. Bye.